The last one that I will show you today, and this is also powerful, is this idea that data explorers know that common knowledge is not so common. There are plenty of things that we just think, or we assume that we know. We assume that that's the way that it's going to be, but we never really test these things. And I love it when my students go out and they test things that they believe to be true. So just because it's always been that way doesn't mean that it has to be that way. And especially if you're working with business ideas, just because things have been that way, you know, it's crazy. One of my favorites is when I was a little boy, my mom told me, number one, don't meet strangers on the internet. Don't do it. That's the worst thing you can do. And the second worst thing you can do is don't get into a car with a stranger. You're going to be abducted. Don't do those things. And yet now, Uber is one of the biggest companies in the world. And with an app, I can, within just a click, I will pay real money to meet a stranger on the internet and get into his car. My mother would be terrified of this. So my mother would never have invested in Uber, yet it's something that millions of people around the world use every day. It's because common knowledge is not always so common. And just because everyone else does it doesn't mean that you have to do it. So if all the other companies are doing something a certain way, why does it mean that your company has to? If all the other students are thinking a certain way, why do you have to? So data explorers ask the right question. And the right question is something that allows them to not just think, but then know. How do we know rather than just think? And to be honest, we have to ask the most important question of mankind that has plagued humanity since the dawn of time. You know, the single most important question of your life, that whenever you are asked this question, you feel it in your heart and your stomach, and your life depends on the answer. And that question is, of course, does my bum look big in this? If you've ever been asked the question, nothing good can come of it. So what would happen? We know this is a dangerous question, but what would happen if we use data to really know if your bum looks big or not in something? Well, here's what you can do. This is a project by Diesel Jeans called the Butt Cam that allows you to go into the dressing room and put on a pair of jeans with various cameras to check if your bum does indeed look big in this or not. Putting a camera in a person's dressing room should be illegal. But now, not only is it not illegal, you can then connect your butt cam to Facebook, live stream your butt, and get results straight away. So you can ask your friends, does my bum look big in this? And you can know in an instant if your friends are going to like it. What a great business opportunity. What a great marketing opportunity. And what a great way to put your bum on the internet, which is a very popular thing. And it's so strange because this is a question that we should shy away from. But as soon as we go and create data about it, and as soon as we know, it increases sales, it increases engagement, it reaches interesting markets, it does all kinds of interesting things. And we can do this with any question, no matter how stupid the question. And this is the last question that I want to leave you with today, because this is something that I learned from my professors when I studied back at the University of Plymouth. And it's this wonderful idea of infinite monkeys. Maybe you know this, maybe you've heard of this idea, but there's a saying that says that if you get an infinite number of monkeys and you give them an infinite number of typewriters, then eventually they will type the complete works of Shakespeare. And this is a very famous thought experiment that tells us that, you know, if we have so many monkeys and so many typewriters, eventually they will hit the keys in a way that resembles the complete works of Shakespeare. But the weird thing is, we think that this is true. And we think that monkeys are completely random. But it turns out if you test it, they're not. And it turns out it's really hard to get infinite monkeys and infinite typewriters, but you can give them an iMac, no problem. So my researchers and my professors over at the University of Plymouth installed a iMac in a monkey enclosure in the zoo to see if they would write the complete works of Shakespeare or anything close to it. So this is one of my professors, Mike Phillips there, you can see. And it was all over the news, as you can see. Bad news, apes couldn't give a monkeys for Shakespeare. Now, what was fascinating about this was that as soon as you give a monkey a typewriter or an iMac, they're very curious about it. Then they beat it to death with sticks and they poop on it and all sorts of things. And basically what they typed was lots of the letter S and a few G's. So you can see one newspaper wrote Romeo, Romeo, which is the closest that you can get. Now the wonderful thing about this is, even though this is completely silly and seems completely ridiculous, it's a very important question. And the writing that the monkeys created was published, and you can find a copy of this in the British Library, and it's called Notes Towards the Complete Works of Shakespeare. And even the monkeys are credited as the authors. And what it does is it proves that monkeys aren't entirely random. They have something that's very, very structured, and they think in a certain way, and they're curious about something. So it may be that if an infinite number of monkeys had an infinite number of typewriters, they'd probably just infinitely poop on them until they write Shakespeare. And this is the ultimate conclusion. Typing monkeys just make mess. So they don't make Shakespeare, they make a mess. And it's okay to figure these things out. So how might you use this in the classroom? Well, please don't unleash monkeys into your classroom, whatever you do. But some questions that you might want to ask yourself. What are the things that people believe to be true, these common knowledge things that we've never really tested? And when we figure out what these things are that we believe to be true, do we have any data to back up those assumptions? Because probably we don't. And if we're good data explorers, we can go out and we can find that maybe the things that we think are true are not entirely true. There's going to be some edge cases. There's going to be some interesting things in there. And where do we make absolute assumptions? So many times I hear students say things like, that would never happen, or this always happens. Danish students will never buy this kind of product. Old ladies will never use this kind of service. Well, that's an assumption. Do we really know it to be true? And can data and experimentation help us confirm or deny any of these assumptions? This can be a great homework test to send your students out and to discover something that we think that everybody knows. And this is also something that's powerful. Has the world changed while the assumption has remained the same? And my favorite example of this is, you've perhaps read the famous book Big Brother. And when Big Brother was written, it was all about surveillance and cameras pointing at every angle and people watching you 24/7. And it was almost a horror story. It was almost, this is a world that we don't want to be in. Yet now, as times have changed, Big Brother is a #1 entertainment franchise where they're like, wow, I want to be on Big Brother. I want 100 cameras watching me. And people will put cameras on their computers, on their phones, and they will live a Big Brother-esque lifestyle. So we can go from a horror story to an entertainment franchise in just 1 second. And what assumptions are important perhaps to our parents or grandparents, but not to you? How has time changed? These are things that we can look at. And the last little exercise that I will leave you with is this, and this is to shatter a few dreams as well. Whilst we are in the break, maybe you can write down your answers to this one. My students believe this, but the reality is something else. To expose this misconception, they should something. And I can give you an example. My students believe that if their Instagram goes viral, they'll become a millionaire overnight. But the reality is, no one wants to see what's on their Instagram. So to expose this misconception, they should work for digital marketing companies to figure out how the world might look, to figure out what's really going on, to figure out just how much hard work it takes to become an overnight sensation.
I was just thinking, because we actually have some of the answers from the questions before.
Previously,
So if you out there will please write your answer for this question. We have, we bring it all together after Michael, and we have 20 minutes together, and we will go back in the chat and we will take what people wrote, because there's so many good answers to some of your questions that we haven't talked about yet.
Brilliant.
So please just write. We're going to start a break, and I'm going to start speaking Danish just in a second.
Sure.
But Adam, I have looked so much forward to having you in the studio and getting everybody to know you. And you just brought us into a whole new world. Thin ice sometimes, and in a stinking phase, because what do you think? But you have so many examples on how to use data and how to become a data explorer.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming, and just stay here, and I'll go over to...
I should say, before we finish, thank you everybody for all of your patience and for watching and joining in. And there's so much more that we can share. So I have my details that are on screen in just a second. And so if anybody wants to think some more about it, you're welcome to email me and discuss this further or help you involve data more into your lesson plans. And because I'm really interested in encouraging people to engage with this subject. So I know we've just touched on it a little bit today, but yeah, if you're engaged, let's go for it.
I'm going to switch over to Danish
Sure.
just for a second. Tusind tak. Nu har vi 10 minutters pause om et øjeblik, men hvis I har noget, som I gerne vil spørge Adam om, eller på andre måder svare på de her spørgsmål, så tager vi det jo op, når vi har lyttet til Michael, så kommer Anne på, Adam kommer på, Michael kommer på, og jeg kommer på. Så vi har masser af muligheder. Vi har 20 minutter sammen der, hvor vi tager jeres svar op og gennemgår de ting. Så spørg løs, og så vil jeg sige til jer, at vi har kun set toppen af isbjerget med Adam her. Han har så mange fantastiske eksempler. Så vi ses 10 minutter over 2. Så vi har lige 10 minutters pause herfra, og så kan I lige få en kop kaffe. Vi ses om lidt.